talk today is human genetic research in anthropology, challenges and the way out. When I'm talking about human genetics and anthropology, I mean, people from non-genetic physical anthropologists think that it is of their no interest of theirs. And then, of course, social anthropology people will not even stay back because it is all genetics. So I request all social anthropologists, all physical anthropologists, even if you are not doing human genetics, stay back so that whatever I'm talking here is not just as a technical person I'm talking as a human being associated with the human science that is anthropology. And then here, like when we talk of anthropology, of course, everybody says we are talking of only human beings, nothing else. Okay. But I believe whatever is being done under the sky on this globe is all anthropology, because nothing is done for somebody else. Everything is done for us only. Everything is affected. Even if a microbiologist is doing something on microbes, it is not doing to benefit the microbes. Finally, at the end of the day, that microbial research is useful to humankind. Similarly, aeronautic sciences, anything you take, everything, any invention, any discovery definitely is going to affect human evolution. And so it should be somewhere or the associated with human evolution. So it is associated with anthropology. But I'm not going there, that side. But now, before getting into my lecture, I just wanted to apologize because I'm going to be a bit critical and also negative in the beginning, but I'll try to bring out some hope at the end. And then when we talk of anthropology, you must be knowing, whatever I'm talking, everybody knows this. Everybody thinks at some part of the time you keep this in mind and you keep thinking on this. But these issues are not actually are not publicly talked, or they are not public platforms, say they are not discussed, and you also don't write about them. You keep cribbing about them. You just think, why is it happening to anthropology? Why are we not getting good jobs? Why are we not called everywhere for lectures? These are the things that are being that are actually troubling anthropologists. We also always feel that we are a bit inferior to others, maybe. No, that type of attitude is there, whether you agree or not. Most of the time they are there. So I just wanted to apologize. I'm going to be a bit critical on those. Why are we like that? Why do we think like that? Do you think anthropology is so low? It is such a great science where nothing in this world is being done which doesn't come under anthropology, but still no anthropologist is recognized, something like that. So I just want to apologize to you. And then coming to first thing, when I just joined MSc previous, I'll be talking mostly about my experience and my department. I was taught that anthropology has so many branches: physiological anthropology, demographic anthropology, this anthropology, that anthropology, genetic anthropology. But the problem here is we always thought anthropology is divided. And all these sub-branches of so-called sub-branches of anthropology, they themselves are big subjects, and people are there who are not anthropologists and who are doing those subjects. Physiology is done by doctors, forensic science is by scientists, and then growth and development, there are people who are doing it. So there are special biotechnologists doing human genetics, zoologists doing human genetics. So there are all these branches are dealt by different other non-anthropological background people. So, but they are doing and they are looking at phenomena or issues through their angle, and they are reporting their results. But we anthropologists cannot afford to be like the way they are doing. Suppose, if a human geneticist talks about association study, he says it is not associated, or it is associated. The disease and the gene are associated or not associated. But our job does not end there. We have to give reasons. If it is associated in one population, why it is associated. If it is not associated in another population, why it is not associated. So we have to look at other things also. So basically what I want to trade is anthropology should be more inclusive. We always should think that we are taking things from others and we are building. It is not that we are diverting, we are branching out. It's not like that. And then in our department, if you talk about anthropology and genetics, in general anthropology, in particular human genetics in our subject. If you take my example, I took anthropology just because I was interested in genetics. And I saw that there was serological genetics, biochemical genetics, and cytogenetics. And based on those papers, I opted for anthropology when I came to New Delhi in 1985. Okay. So now the point here is I always took pride to be a geneticist rather than anthropologist. I always to tell people, yes, I'm a human geneticist teaching I'm studying an anthropology department. So I always like to be called more a geneticist than anthropologist. But once I became a teacher and started teaching and doing my independent research, then I realized how difficult it is to interpret genetic data, especially human evolutionary data on human evolution or migrations, gene flow, all these things, unless you have a proper understanding of the cultural context and, paleoanthropology, cultural anthropology, ethnology, ethnography. If you don't have the knowledge of these things, you will not be able to give proper interpretations to your genetic data. So this I realized when I became old, almost old. Now I'm old. 20 years back, I'm little less older. So that time I realized. But I wish you all realize right now that anthropology cannot be looked at as a single physiology or genetics or anything like that. Everything has to be taken together and done together. So now, if you talk about our department, when I joined the department in MSc, there were big teachers who were doing genetics. Swadesh Sheth, my MPhil supervisor, Professor Bhasin, Professor A.K. Kalla, and Professor Ghosh. They had very good labs, and at that time they were publishing so well, and their work was almost matching the international standards. That was the beauty of anthropology at 30 years back or 25 years back. Our department, especially the Department of Anthropology, Delhi University, was no less than any of the international standard laboratories of human genetics. We were very good. And if you go and see back, way back around 30 years back, all the publications, very good publications, very good journals we have been publishing. Not me, my supervisors and my teachers, they were doing well. And because that was the reason, because in 1900s, Landsteiner, Smithies, in all these things, electrophoretic techniques, actually, during those days, all the people did human evolutionary studies, that is human variation studies, based on gene products. They are not genes. They were gene products. ABO system is a gene product. You talk about haptoglobin system, it is a gene product. They did the phenotype calculations at the population level and went back to allele frequency distributions. That is what they did. So at gene products level, whatever was being done at world level was also known to us. We could catch them up and we could do them. We were very, very good at in those days. But after maybe 1980s or so, 1975, later on that, or 80s above, what happened was world moved forward, because in human genetic research, not human genetics, in general genetic research was trying to do, that is PCR technologies, RFLB technologies, southern blotting technology, sequencing technologies, NGS technologies, microarray technology. There are so many genetic technologies that have come up in the process of unveiling the human genome. That is, in the process of Human Genome Project success, these various types of technologies have developed. But the problem went with anthropology in India was our anthropologists could not catch up with those technologies because they thought they are very, very hi-fi and we don't need them. And when I was in 1986, when I was doing MSc previous, there is a paper, Human Genetics, in which we were taught genetic screening, counseling, and engineering. And at the engineering part, we were taught on southern blotting. Southern blotting today is the most oldest technology, and that technology was supposed to us for it was taught as a human genetic engineering. That is what we thought, and we did. And in the examination also, they definitely will be there will be a question on human genetic engineering. So we by hearted southern blotting, and we wrote. So those were the days. Southern blotting was initially, so people Only theory was taught and developed southern blotting in anthropology field, and later on came many other technologies, as I already told you, and nobody could catch up those technologies. So as a result, world moved, but anthropology stayed back. So that was the major problem. And second problem was that we did not catch up with the technologies, first point. Second is, what we did was we were only and those days ABO blood group systems among Koya tribe of Andhra Pradesh. This is the title of a PhD thesis, suppose. And that was a big thing, that was an in thing in those days. Okay. But now if you produce ABO blood groups among Agarwals of Delhi, nobody will accept it. Because during the process of your PhD, you learn say technology or techniques which should be useful to you in other in your job field, which if you do a blood grouping technique now, nobody will accept you and give you a job. So that is where we lost the track. And then that is how we lost and human genetics is sidelined in anthropology, because we lost technology. Because most of the people who were supposed to be doing human genetics and getting a PhD, like blood group serum proteins in 1980s and 90s, they could not get a job in genetic research institutions. Like before 1980s, Dr. Shashibala, Dr. Tara Devi, all these people who were my seniors, who were the doctorate from our laboratory, they all are well established in genetic research centers, because that time what they did was relevant. But now what they did is not no more relevant. We have to catch up with the technology that we didn't do. And another thing is even the approach. For example, sickle cell hemoglobin. I just give a small example. Sickle cell hemoglobin. Sickle cell hemoglobin, if a person did PhD on sickle cell hemoglobin in 3 populations, reported the frequency of sickle cell in 3 populations, and 2 populations may sickle cell frequency is almost the same, and the third population it is not the same. So the conclusion he will derive is that these 2 A and B populations where the frequency distribution is same, they are close, genetically closer, and they must be having some common ancestry, and the C population is different from them. So this was again 30 years back. If such a thesis, such a paper is published, it is a big. Okay. But now if you do that, it doesn't it is no more valid, because sickle cell hemoglobin gene is completely understood by people. Its clinical implications, its evolutionary implications, almost everybody knows everything about sickle cell anemia. In such a situation, if we are interfering with frequencies of sickle cell anemia, because if you know that this particular population has sickle cell anemia, they are going to they will go and do counseling, they will go screening or many other things, and they will stop the growth of genetic load in terms of sickle cell anemia will be reduced in certain populations. So in that case, those inferences on the basis of sickle cell anemia may not be relevant. Of course, we have to do in evolutionary studies, we have to take more markers. I'm just giving you an example of sickle cell anemia. So such things now they are not relevant. So again, I'm telling you, world moved to PCR, we stayed with ABO and sickle cell anemia. So there was again the gap. Then coming to 1980s and 2000, all the technologies have developed, and Human Genome Project came in around 2000 to 2000, and then they all thought that, of course, once the human genome is sequenced, we will get answers for each and every health issue, everything will be sorted out. So this is what they believed, and they were very, very happy, but nothing came. It is almost 20 years, no gene-based diagnosis, no gene-based treatment, no gene-based management is available presently for most of the diseases, lifestyle disease or anything like that. Nothing is actually coming out. So that was a major problem. Then world was doing DNA markers, we were doing ABO blood groups. There lies the gap. Then what happened was, going by this, actually Human Genome Project, there were 4 countries who participated, but India we did not do, because we're always late and we missed the bus. In those days there were papers, headlines, India missed the bus in Human Genome Project. There were articles. So we missed the bus. But here in I think around 93 or so, Department of Biotechnology, Government of India thought of thought of starting a human genome diversity program. World was doing it, so we thought we will also understand human genome diversity in India and understand the peopling of India. Okay, this is what they did. So now in that, Professor S. Sharath Chandra from Bangalore, K.S. Singh, the then retired anthropological survey director, and then Pratha P. Majumdar, ISI Calcutta. These were the people who came together and started. And they realized what was the problem with anthropological diversity. Diversity studies were done only by anthropologists. They tried to review that, and they realized whatever anthropological data was produced, that can be used for two purposes. One is understanding peopling of India. Second is also some clinical implications. For peopling of India, though there were many papers talking about peopling of India, which populations are older, which are newer, which are closer, which are distant, this type of data publications were there, but they were not giving any conclusive inferences, because the genetic data produced was mostly on not very systematically done. Some population, suppose A, B, C MN blood group is available on A population, so ABO is blood group data is available on B population. So there is no systematic generation of data. So there was no comparable data to come to conclusive inference on people of India. So they human genome diversity program people thought, let us have common markers and let us go ahead. This is what they thought. Now let me tell you, before going towards this human genome project, let me tell you another thing. Why should we move from gene product to genetic in anthropology studies? We were doing anthropology migrations. ABO blood group is also okay, but why should we do? I gave you two reasons. Another reason for that is, one reason I told you that hemoglobin S, one reason that you cannot do, because it is being interfered. So we need markers which cannot be interfered or influenced by others or nature. So that type of regions are present in human genome, that is non-coding regions, 98%. Yesterday, Dr. Tangaraj was talking about coding regions are only 2 to 3%. The rest of the genome is there, but we don't know what it is. Once upon a time, it was called as junk DNA, but now it cannot even be called as junk DNA, but we don't know what is the use of that particular non-coding regions. So that huge amount of non-coding regions are available in human genome, whose function is yet to be known. So those regions would be very, very effective for understanding human evolution. That is why we have to move from gene product research to genomic research. From ABO blood groups, so that means you have to now, what is central dogma is gene transcribes, DNA transcribes to RNA, RNA translates to protein. So we used to first capture at protein level and back calculate ABO blood groups, everything, and then back calculate gene frequencies. But now it is, we are directly targeting the gene. And moreover, this even single gene disorders, for example, again sickle cell anemia, there are different 4 or 5 types of sickle cell anemic phenotypes. Some types of phenotypes are very, very severe. The child will not live even 2-3 years more. But now there are some very mild phenotypes. So that means there are other genic regions in that beta globin gene which are influencing the expression of sickle cell anemia. So even single gene disorders are influenced by other parts of the gene. So that is why instead of going for genes with coding regions, non-coding regions. So non-coding regions was possible only with DNA markers. Second is, DNA is a very stable molecule. Third is, DNA may, if you do DNA analysis, the haplotypic construction is also possible. Once you have a haplotype, the inferences on human migrations is more relevant rather than single nucleotide or RFLPs or any other, I mean to say, blood groups or serum proteins. So because of these reasons, people try to prefer genomic regions for human diversity studies rather than gene products or the traditional genetic markers. And here one more thing we really have to think, suppose sickle cell is there, or for that matter thalassemia is there, hemophilia, all these genetic diseases. These are all DMD, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, X-linked disease. All diseases, these diseases are there in Indian populations also. One thing is a positive thing, that there are government programs which are counseling. So we are trying to reduce the genetic load. But another aspect is the people, the suppose sickle cell anemic patient was supposed to die within 6 years of their birth, but now their life is prolonged to the reproductive age also. If the person with sickle cell homozygous condition, that is a sickle cell disease person, reproduces, he is going to pass on the disease gene to all the children. I mean, so there is, again, because of this good treatment management technologies, there is a chance of these genes being increased in population. This just for the food for thought. I mean, you just have to think on these things. So genetic markers, are now we have to look for genetic markers which are not influenced by environmental something. That's the non-genetic markers that people have shifted from traditional markers to this genomic markers or DNA markers. Then now coming to, I told you when we did this traditional markers also, what happened? We generated huge data. We could not give much input into peopling of India, but we generated so much of good data on sickle cells, other some clinical markers, which was used for national programs where sickle cell control programs or sickle cell management programs are there. Madhya Pradesh, there are centers where people are screened and they are given white card, yellow card, something like that. They are managing, I mean, they are trying to reduce by genetic counseling. These programs, why are they preferring it? Why could they get into it? Because the data generated by anthropologists was available to clinicians. Whenever clinician sees, he sees only one patient and he sees maximum one family. But for an anthropologist, the whole population is our universe. We collect data and we generate data. So that data was a real gold mine for government people, though they have used this data to have some government health programs. So indirectly or directly, we were contributing to national health programs, but we were neither acknowledged nor we didn't even know that we are actually doing it. There might be some exceptions. There might be some anthropologists who must have been in the committees, but still major chunk of credit went to non-anthropological background people rather than anthropology background people. Then coming to Human Genome Diversity Program. This is an important thing again. Around 56 to 58 genetic, just to have a common genetic marker available for all the population studying. So they have prescribed around 56 markers. They said at least 11 ALU markers everybody have to do, and then 11 mitochondrial markers everybody have to do. So these things they kept, and they started Human Genome Diversity Program. And most of the time, non-anthropology background people who were very good in biotechnological techniques could attract funds for this Human Genome Diversity Program, and they started working on it. But unfortunately, they realized going to populations, getting data, convincing people was not their cup of tea. So they had to approach anthropologists. Anthropologists got into these things. And unfortunately, what happened was the duty or the role of anthropologists restricted only to collection of blood samples, and then maxima authorship in the fourth or fifth authorship in the papers. So that was very unfortunate that again we were at loss. And even Human Genome Project, Diversity Project, after that there were few anthropologists who could independently get some funds for a Human Genome Diversity Program, but they could not successfully complete the projects because they did not have the good experience of human genetic technologies. They didn't know. So as a result, they could not complete them properly. And so they were at loss. So what I mean to say is human genome diversity. Whenever we talk of human diversity, and without anthropologists, you cannot think of. But though we were involved to a certain extent, but that involvement was not good enough or sufficient enough to make a dent in scientific community. So that was the major reason we could not make a mark. Even Human Genome Diversity. Now the Department of Biotechnology, Government of India does not fund any projects on human genome diversity. Why don't they fund? The reason for that is because they have spent huge amounts of money, energy, time on diversity program. They thought they will not only answer the question or questions on human peopling of India, but they would also be able to have some clinical inputs or outputs from this research. But unfortunately, they could not do anything. After that, nothing happened with respect to clinical implications of this human genome diversity program. As a result, this program is almost, it is no more funding for human genome diversity as far as I know. But there are some other, even DST is taking, previously genetic or genomic or only DBT used to fund. I remember I wrote a project where association of some disease, and I sent to ICMR. After 2.5 years, they sent me a mail saying that it fits into DBT area rather than ICMR. Please go and submit. So DNA, genes, and genome is only for, but now it is not the case. Even ICMR, DST, even ICSR also, ICSSR. If there is no change for other aspects, field work, everything they are giving. So there are other ways of attracting funds. So now here what happened was the failure for human genome project was because it did not have much of application value at the end of the project. That was because when they collected DNA samples, they did not collect any other clinical or morphological data. So they could not make any correlations between genetics and genes. As a result, nothing much came out. So they realized that just genetics will not help. We also need some other health aspect should be included. Then health became an important aspect for genetic researchers. Of course, they are doing in a different way, but anthropological, human health and human genetic research, they tried to combine, and they started again working on that. Then they realized after doing, there are many studies, candidate gene analysis. There are different types of genetic studies like candidate gene analysis or genome-wide searches, majorly two only. So when you talk of candidate gene, it is hypothesis driven research where you know this gene is, the function of this gene is this. If there is a mutation in this gene, this is expected. So you have some hypothesis and you go ahead with the candidate gene. And it is a poor man's research. I always prefer candidate gene. And the technology driven research is, just you take huge number of samples and you run on a sequencer and you see that is a big, it's very expensive research. So sequencing and all that, that is a different level, technology driven research where you don't have a particular hypothesis. So there is nothing wrong in both of them, because yesterday when Dr. Pandey was talking about, it is nothing wrong if you have a research without any hypothesis, and even it is not wrong if you have an hypothesis. So these two are equally good. It depends on which is suitable to you, what type of study design you are doing, what is your research question. That was Dr. Pandey yesterday was actually referring to. But again, what happened here is this candidate gene analysis, if you just see a disease and a genetic marker, in one population you found it as to be associated, the other population it is not associated. Similarly, even the genome-wide searches, if you go, if it is done in European populations, there are certain regions for heart attack, they are found to be associated, but the same regions, if you bring and do it in India, they are not associated. Again, the Francis Collins genes fill the genes, load the gun, and environment pulls it. So again, what happened was now they realized that genes don't behave differently in different environments. So now it came to people's brain that it is not only genes and the disease, there is something that is happening between gene, DNA, mRNA, and protein and disease. These 4 steps there are many other things which are other environmental factors, like culture is an environment, food, lifestyle is an environment, physical environment, air, water, climate is an environment, your thought process are an environment. So there are so many things which act and alter the relation between the gene mutation, the DNA, and the protein. Not only protein, it is protein and its association with the disease. So there are so many things happening in between them, and these happening things, that is in form of epigenetics, you can think histone modification. In epigenetics, again, is a different types. Whatever is happening, it is because of the environment. So that environment again is different. So when you see from gene to disease, if you just talk in terms of single central dogma, DNA to RNA to protein to disease, it should be a linear process, and it is not a linear process. From DNA, from one mutation can have different variations in their expression, and then disease types variation. So this type of, when this approach came, then now we should really know, don't you think this particular aspect is full of anthropology? Don't you think we can contribute maximum to understand the relation between genes and the disease? And here, this is the time for us to really enter into human genetic research, and this behavior of genes is contextual. So this contextual behavior has to be deciphered by anthropologists. There is nobody. Yesterday, Dr. Yagnik was saying, there is nothing without genetics, nothing in this world. For example, if you take a medicine, even that the working of medicine on your health depends on your genes. Infectious diseases, we're all thinking that corona is there, we may get anytime. Most of us, you're not getting. In single house, one is getting, one is not getting. Why? Because there is something that is immunology. What is immunology? Again, immunology is your genetics. Genes, they have immunology, genetics is there. And the expression of immunogenes, that is also depending on the foods and the environment. So this type of gene environment interactions through epigenetics into phenotype is a big paradigm in which anthropologists can substantially contribute. That is my submission. So previously, what we did was we just did only some people, physiology people. I'm interested in doing blood pressure among so many populations. They did blood pressure, some did obesity, some did genetic markers, some did biochemical markers, something like that. Everybody, anthropologists pick up their own topics. They're proud of their own topics. They're doing it. But now it is no more like that. We have to combine everything. So in just doing independently genetic markers and disease profiles of population, we should also understand the disease profile in light of genetic markers in different populations, in different cultural contexts. Then only there will be a meaningful data can be generated, and then you can really answer the questions related to health, especially in India, there is diversity at every level. I always tell in my class also, if you go to America, I don't know, I have been to America for my postdoctoral fellowship because Shivani just told. So there, cup of, if you want to have tea, everywhere tea is the same taste, wohi dip wala. And then that tea is $2, $1, whatever is the price, everywhere is the same price. But here in India, how many variations are there in tea? Masala tea, Iranian tea, Ilaichi tea, more milk wala tea. So much of variation in your tea itself. So what I'm trying to say is the diversity of food and taste and genetic architecture and epigenetic mechanisms, all these variations are acting on your genome through epigenetic mechanisms. So there is so much of diversity in your epigenome, which has to be captured now. And through this, we need to understand health. And why should you be health? We are not medical doctors. Because why should we do health? Because anthropology is the study of human beings in time and space. Time and space. When you fit your anthropology into such a wide, big, beautiful definition, you cannot ignore anything which is related to anthropology. So anything that is happening under sky is coming somewhere or the other, which is interfering human evolution. So when you talk of health, health is the major, health and disease. Disease is the major phenomena which affects Darwinian fitness, which affects mortality, morbidity. And mortality, morbidity, Darwinian fitness, these are the major aspects of human evolution, selection, whatever it is. So these things, and when people were doing human genetics 20, 30 years back, we always know allele frequencies should not change from one generation to another generation. Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, all anthropologists doing genetics will have by hearted this. We all know that it should not change. If it changes, there is evolution. So whatever genetic, if my population is not following Hardy-Weinberg with this particular genetic marker, I only try to look for reasons within that 4 evolutionary forces: random mating, selection, drift, and gene flow, migration. Only these are 4, 5 evolutionary forces we try to keep. I mean, we were restricted our understanding to these 5 evolutionary forces, but it is not true. When you talk of this, when you talk of epigenetics, the things are very, very, very different. Genetic variations, I mean genes, one is genetic variations in form of mutations, and other is epigenetic variations, and these two will control the gene expression, and these two control the phenotypic expression. As a result, if there is a variation in populations with respect to BMI, that is also become because of epigenetic and genetics. If there is a cholesterol differences in populations, it is because of this. And if you have triglyceride differences, because of this. So anything, anything, as Yagnik sir said, it is all genetics. Now coming to genetic architecture also alters the human behavior. So now the role of anthropologists, the role of anthropologists is immense in human health, and without human genetics there is no anthropology. And when you talk of anthropology, suppose I do my PhD in something like SNP of so and so, so and so in some populations. At the end of the day, I'm learning certain technologies. At least I will be able to get a job in a pharmaceutical company, in NGO where they are doing PCR. I mean, if you are now Corona is there, so very few people are there who are really acquainted with RT-PCR, reverse transcriptase PCR. So we do have a. So if people are if people are introduced to new technologies, the scope of their jobs also will increase. For these reasons, human genetic research is a must in anthropological studies, and just human genetic research is not sufficient. Human genetic research in different cultural contexts with different types of phenotypes we have to study, and that is really the real in anthropology presently. Now the question is, how are we going to do human genetic research, human genomic research? Because it is very, very expensive, number one. So because through my experience, I can tell you a few things. So one important thing is young faculty members, whoever they are, whether they are in Bihar, whether they are in Orissa, whether they are in Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, wherever they are, they must be, they should be, and human genetic research is taught in genetics is taught in very few departments. Labs are always disappeared from anthropology department, except few departments like Delhi University, Raipur University, and then Udaipur Anthropology. So there is no much human genetics laboratory. So now you have to, at least if you are not having a laboratory infrastructure, you should theoretically you understand the concepts. And then once you understand, there are ways, there are funding agencies which can give. And funding agents, while funding, if you are from a remote area, they try to give an edge to you all. So I think young faculty members should attract funds doing some sort of human genetic research, and then train their students in human genetic research. That is one way. Then here also, again, there are different problems. Yagnik said, Professor Dr. Yagnik said only cohort studies should be funded. And Dr. Pandey said cohort studies are very, very difficult. You should only candidate gene studies or cross-sectional studies. You understand what I mean to say? So there are different views on that. And even in anthropology, some people say that why should an anthropologist look for an application value? We are academicians, we only give theories and keep quiet. The rest of the things will be done in the rest of the part of the world. No, unless you do something meaningful with which is application. That is my belief. Somebody else believes something else. So what I'm talking to you about through my mind, my heart. So I just wanted to tell you that Yagnik says cross-sectional, longitudinal studies, and Pandey says it's difficult, so you should. So both of them are right. Both of them are right. And the question, anthropologist, we always read, there are two types of studies, longitudinal studies or cross-sectional studies. Unfortunately, not a single longitudinal study is, I mean, I don't find any longitudinal studies for years. There are cohorts maintained in and by anthropologists. We don't do that. We never did. There are very few people like Inclin, Dr. N.K. Arora, they are doing this, and Dr. Yagnik. Very few studies are on cohort. And recently, my our colleague, Dr. Vipin Gupta, he is developing a cohort on pregnant women. So these cohort studies, they're actually longitudinal studies which we were taught in theory. We have to also start working with young faculty members. They should start some cohorts. And after 20, 30 years, you should not think 30 years, hum rahenge, nahi rahenge, what is the use? No, whether we are there or not, let it be. Somebody else will pick it up. But you are generating important scientific data which will be used for future generations. So we have to document today and we have to see what is the future. So we are not able to understand much of Neanderthals, Australopithecus, and Homo erectus. Why? Because they did not do longitudinal studies. We humans, we have to do longitudinal studies so that we leave something for future generations. And then, of course, small laboratories. So I mean, if, for starters, it is better you do the candidate gene studies. For that, you need little funds, and one should be attracted from various organizations. Second option is Professor V.R. Rao is in online now. Tomorrow we have his talk. He was once acting director to Anthropological Survey of India. Thanks to him, he has developed wonderful genetic infrastructure in most of the Anthropological Survey of India institutes. Dehradun, Udaipur, Mysore. Some of our students, Dr. Vipin Gupta, Priyanka Kurana, there are few students from our department who did genetic research. They did their lab work when they signed an MOU with Anthropological Survey of India, and they worked there, they did the work. So that is what it is, collaboration. You can collaborate with ASI. And you can write to ASI director. That is today it is Professor Vinay Kumar Srivastav. He from our department. I'm proud to say also. So you can write and you can have for all these things. You need a passion, you need consistency, and you also need to have that strong will that you have to do something. So you can go ahead. Then third point I would love to say is you can also collaborate with non-anthropological people. But again, if you do with Muklik, 20, 30 years again back, if I go, when I went before joining this department, whenever I met a medical doctor for some association study, something like that, they looked upon me. Achha, anthropologist, you are anthropologist. Okay. So they never realized anthropology is important. But nowadays it is not like that. Even anthropology is equally acknowledged. So it is better you talk to non-anthropological laboratories and you collaborate. And the collaboration should not be just getting samples and authorship. No. You should be there. You should do the techniques. You learn the techniques, and you also contribute in the paper writing. This training program in a non-anthropological laboratory with an anthropological background will make you very, very strong. And then this can be passed on to your next generation, your students or your juniors. This is how you have to take it forward. And recently there is in physical anthropology, or for that matter any biological or sciences, you cannot have single author. Gone are those days. You cannot have single authorship. When I was USA working as a postdoctoral fellow, you don't remember, you don't know, I was given DNA of a family, 2 families, and I'm supposed to do genotyping on a sequencer, generate data, and then genotype the data on computer, and then send the data to a statistician. You understand? My work was a very, very limited work. But before the DNA comes in the form of DNA, blood collection, from whom? The family members, who found the family, doctors, who convinced the family, counselors. So there was a team of people who have been involved in identifying I was working on narcolepsy gene, sleep disorder, narcolepsy families, and talking to them, collecting their DNA, blood sample, extracting DNA, storing them, and that DNA comes to me. I do some work and I give it to statistician. So one day I went to my professor there. He was Professor Rajiv Kuchellapati, Einstein College of Medicine, New York. I asked him, can I also do this? Can I also learn this? I don't know all these things. I don't know before DNA. I don't know after genotyping. How will I survive? He said, you cannot overnight become a statistician. You cannot overnight become a genetic counselor. You cannot overnight become a epidemiologist. You have to work in tandem with people who have different expertises. Then only you will be able to survive in scientific field. That is the first lesson and the last lesson that man gave to me. Unless you collaborate, unless you adjust with people, and then keep away your egos and start working with people in harmony, and you can get very good results. It is not only enhancing your career, it's not only enhancing your subject, it is also you're contributing to scientific field. You must, I don't know if how many of you heard about yesterday's lecture of Dr. Yagi. I felt it amazing. I mean, he for 25 years maintaining a cohort, and now also he says I will collaborate and we will work on that. It is beautiful. I mean, you should appreciate the passion. And he also says sometimes you also should be ready to shell down money from your pocket. Well, you have to do means you have to do. So if you are passionate, and these contributions to science will, I don't say you should become famous or do something like that, but people will remember you. You know, you feel good that you have contributed something to this world. I think it is looking like more of a general, moral science. Doesn't matter. Then second is, suppose I have 3 students or 4 students. We need these 3 students should work on a single population, various aspects, rather than people. Guides say you do whatever you want to do. If everybody does whatever want to do, 3 years of PhD work, how much can work? Small work, you will get a small publication somewhere. Instead, if you 3-4 brains together, you work together, you collect data together, generate data together, what would happen? You get a huge data. You have your independent PhDs. When you are publishing, publish in common authorship. So that will give better exposure to the whole team. It doesn't matter who is the first author, who is the second author, who is the corresponding author, doesn't matter. But the experience, and even to communicate a paper to a big journal is a learning process. I feel I don't know how to communicate. I tell you, only my students they do it. I don't know. Even to communicate a paper to a journal is a big thing, is a learning process. So you should be more interested in learning process than the product. Product will automatically run. So the Indian Bhagavad Gita also says this. Now I don't have to talk that here now. And then so the teamwork within the students. I tell you, recently to Somarjeet and Masan. These 2 students are from Dr. Mandal sir students. Kiran student is Cindy, my student. Sunanda Karke, there is my student, she's on the online. All 4 of them got collected data from meso population on various aspects. And 3 of them have already done PhD, and 1 is yet to do something, MPhil she has done, she'll be doing. So here, the beauty is we have already got very 2 good publications. One is Gene, is more than 2 impact factor. The other is one is American Journal of Human Biology. That could be possible. Before these 3 people could submit their PhDs, we could get these publications because they worked together. They got the data together. They analyzed the data together. And then you have to listen to your supervisor, and then they were so nice that they did not fight, and they finally agreed to who is the first author, who is the second author, whomever I say, they agreed, and finally we got the publication in a good journal. So this is the thing that everybody has to learn. Important thing is, like, most of the people are also from remote areas, not very well developed areas. They are also worried about English. English is a big thing for many people. So English should not be a barrier for scientific community. Once there was I think a few years back, there was some vice chancellor was retiring. There was a meeting in our university. The then principal of Venkateshwara College was, before that somebody was talking very nice English. He spoke. After that, some chemistry man, science background man came. He said, "I'm so sorry. I also like the vice chancellor very much, but my English is not so good that I won't be able to express myself so well." So after that comes our Telugu man from Venkateshwara College principal. I don't remember his name. Shankar Reddy, Dr. Shankar Reddy. He comes. He says, if you have to express yourself, your love, your emotion, your knowledge, your passion, you don't need to have good language. Language is no barrier to your expressions. That is really true. And he spoke very well. So here I am telling you, please don't go that while writing, you always are scared. There are people who are passionate about language. There's a Professor V.K. Srivastava. If after listening to his if he sends a paper to us, the title, we have to go and see the dictionary to understand the title. Forget about the paper. Oh, it's very difficult to understand even the title because English is very tough. For me, it is tough. So for him, it is a passion. Though he likes to write good English, he talks, likes to. So let him do that, and it is his style. So it is not that everybody has to follow the same thing, and we should not lag behind just because of language, that is foreign language. Okay, so let us move on. You can write out your own language. Yesterday it was so beautiful. Chanda Chaturvedi sir, first lecture yesterday, he said if anybody from other parts of India who cannot follow English well, I also can be bilingual. So beautifully, so politely he said. And of course, we said everybody can understand. Most of them, even if they're not understanding, they will not say, because not knowing English, they think it is a limitation or it is a problem. It is not a problem. It is not at all a problem. And you can have your thing. And when I was doing my PhD, don't believe, my Professor Kalla he writes very good English, my professor. So I used to give my idea, sir, this is my idea, I don't know how to write. So he used to dictate my idea. So if it is not fitting into my idea, sir, it is not fitting. It's no, it's not right. Then I used to make him dictate at least 4 or 5 times to come to fit into my idea. So this should be the way you should go ahead, even if you don't know the language. It doesn't matter. Lastly, I think we are running out short of time. Lastly, I wanted to tell you, Darwin, everybody knows, he's a god to an anthropologist, physical anthropologist. Mendel, Darwin, observational studies, Mendel, experimentation studies. He started experimentation, natural phenomena. Then comes our pure technological experiments and all that. They were all single individuals. They did singly. They are remembered even today. So we cannot, I cannot stand alone here, because if I have to do a good publication, I need so many people. Then only I will be able to publish. So there is no name concept now. It is only the philosophy concept. And who are the contributors to that concept? This thing can arise. That means you have to create Mendels, you have to create Darwins, you have to create such big people in your ideas. Not single individual cannot be. Saraswati cannot never be Darwin or Mendel, because I don't know how to type on a computer properly. I don't know how to email on a computer. Without computers, there is no. Darwin didn't have to do anything with the computer. Mendel didn't have to do anything with the computer. They just have to follow their passion. I cannot do that. I cannot afford to just follow my passion. I have to have many other things. Paraphernalia is much required. So my approach is different. But I have to create Mendel's intelligence, Mendel's vision, Darwin's intelligence, Darwin's vision through a teamwork. That is what we try to do. And I expect you all also, I don't say follow us, but at least you can give a thought on what we are doing. If you think I'm making sense to you all, you can, of course, after maybe 10 years, you will come up with something new. This is my idea. After you try to do something like this, and after a few years, you will come up with something very new, because technology are again changing. You don't know what is going to happen. Corona is we never expected 4 months we will stay home. We stayed. So what is happening? We don't know. How is going to be our field work? We don't know. So what is going to happen in future? Nobody knows. So start working, have passion, less selfishness. This will take you to. So human genetic research at the end has to be a major component of anthropological departments. This is possible only if the new faculty members take interest, and the people presently, like, from our department, Yai Faba and the other person, Suraj, they were PhD students of our department. They were trained in genetics, and they opened a laboratory in Manipur, in University, Imphal, Manipur. So what I'm trying to say is, 2 people we trained, they opened a lab there. One of my students, Ratika Samtani, she's done PhD with us. She's now in MIT. She started an anthropology genetic lab in MIT University. So this is how you have to spread anthropological genetic research. That's all. Thank you very much.